We have reached the 1,000 subscribers. Thanks everyone for your support. And to celebrate, we're not only going to have a look to the AMG GTS, but we will also compare these depreciation curves to the ones of the F Type R. And as a cherry on top of the pie, I also added an additional part to the forecasted values, and that means that we have a lot to do, so let's go! Now, as always, we will first take a broad market perspective and then slowly zoom into some of the more specific elements for the GTS market, such as the depreciation per year and the fair purchasing prices. For most of the parts in the analysis, we will then also compare these numbers directly to those of the F Type R, and at the end of the video, we will draw a conclusion then for the GTS market. This analysis was, by the way, requested by Dan Chang, and that of course does also mean that you can request an analysis simply by commenting the name of the car which you would like to see featured in the video. Also make sure then to subscribe and to click the notification bell so you get notified when your requested video goes live. Now we will start with the market exploration for the GTS, and we will do that by having a look to these histograms over here. In the top you can see the histogram for the full market, and below that you can see the same histogram but split by new and used cars. But let's start with the full market at the top. You can see that there are currently 152 AMG GTSs for sale and that they have an average price point of $106,000. Prices, however, vary quite a bit. You can already get yourself into a GTS from around $60,000, but prices stretch up all the way then to $150,000. You can see, however, that there are only a few cars available at the top end of the price spectrum. And if we move then to the histogram at the bottom, then we can see, of course, that these are all brand new cars. The rest of the market is then further split between the used cars and the used cars which are sold at dealerships. And we can see that these cars are a bit more expensive than the used cars. The average price point for these cars is namely $90,000, where it is on average $87,000 for the used cars. And just by looking to the histograms, we can already observe that there's a huge gap between the new and the used cars. And this of course already tells us something about the depreciation per year, so let's have a look to that. In the graph popping up over here, you can see that we have now model year on the horizontal axis and price on the vertical axis. Each of the bubbles which you see represents an AMG GTS for sale in today's market, and the blue solid line going through the graph represents the depreciation curve. And if I put this graph on the big screen then, you can see that the average depreciation per year for an AMG GTS is $13,324 per year. This is, however, an average number, and it means that the actual depreciation which you can expect on the car depends very much on the age of the car. The brand new AMG GTSs have, for example, an average price point of $148,000, whereas the cars which are 1 year old have an average price point of $108,000. So this means that in your first year of ownership, you can expect to lose around $40,000 on a GTS. Relatively, this is then equal to a loss of 27%. Now, just as with any other car, this number decreases quite rapidly as the car gets older. In the second year of ownership, we can see namely a price drop of around $19,000, and in the third year of ownership, we can see a price drop of around $3,900. And to be fair, this is quite a nice bottom in the depreciation curve, and I certainly didn't expect to see this for the AMG GTS. So what does this mean then for the future values? Well, let's have a look. And we're going to do that by using the graph over here, which shows the forecasted value range. And if I put this graph on the big screen, you can see that the depreciation curve is now forecasted 1 year into the future, and that there's a shaded area surrounding the forecast. And this shaded area, or the forecasted value range, shows the range where it is most likely that the average price point for a 2016 car will be 1 year from now. Or in other words, it shows that there's a 95% chance that the average price point of a car with model year 2016 will lay within that range in 1 year time. And if we inspect this range, we can see that the bottom is formed by $71.5 thousand and that the top is formed by $105,000. There are, however, two strange things going on with this forecasted value range. First of all, the range itself is huge. I mean, you don't really need any model to say that the average price point of a car with model year 2016 will lay within that range 1 year from now. You can just use some common sense. Second then, you can see that the majority of the range is actually focused towards a slight price increase instead of a price decrease. This, however, doesn't reflect the real and true expectations. This forecast is then also a little bit skewed. And the reason for this are the cars with model year 2016. You can see namely that the price range for these cars is huge, and that is caused by the fact that some cars have a very low mileage. It is even so that the average mileage for cars with model year 2016 is lower than the average mileage for cars with model year 2017. And this is something which doesn't happen that often. Normally you namely see that the older the car, the more mileage that car has. Now for this particular situation, it does then also mean that the depreciation curve and the forecasted value range are skewed a bit upwards. And to correct for this effect, I estimated a statistical model which separates the effect of mileage and model year. And the result of that you can see in the graph over here. You can see that the forecasted value range is now replaced by orange dots, and these orange dots represent the forecasted values for cars with different mileages. The dot which you see all the way at the bottom represents an AMG GTS for model year 2016, 1 year from now, with a mileage of 25,000 miles. And according to the model, this car will have a price of $72,996. And from top to bottom, the other orange bubbles represent respectively cars with a mileage of 20,000 miles, 15,000 miles, 10,000 miles, 5,000 miles, and 2,500 miles. And I chose exactly these values because they more or less represent the mileage distribution for the full market. Now then, the estimation for the dot with the lowest mileage, which is 2,500 miles, is $84,414. And combining then all the forecasted values, we end up with an average of $78,590. And as expected, this value lays in the bottom part of the forecasted value range which we saw earlier. It represents a drop of about $7,300 compared to the cars of model year 2016 and a drop of $11,200 compared to the cars of model year 2017. Taking into account then that the average price point for the cars of model year 2016 is slightly inflated, I think that this forecast is quite reasonable. But how do all of these numbers compare then to those of the F Type R? Let's have a look. And we're going to do that with this graph over here, where the F Type is now represented in orange. First of all, you can see that the GTS is quite a bit more expensive than the F Type R. Second then, you can see that there's not such a big difference between the depreciation curves for both cars. And also in monetary terms, they are almost identical. The F Type R is namely depreciating at a rate at, on average, $12,177 per year. It is however at the end of the depreciation curves that we can start to see some difference between the two cars. Here we can namely see that it appears to be the case that the bottoming pattern in the depreciation curve for the AMG GTS is slightly stronger than it is for the F Type R. And that is even if we correct for the slightly increased average price point for the GTS in model year 2016. And this difference is then also reflected in the forecasted prices. The F Type R is namely expected to drop with around $5,100, which is more or less in line with the expected drop for the AMG GTS. Now in relative terms, this drop is of course a lot higher for the F Type R than it is for the GTS. You can see namely that the older GTSs are priced significantly higher than the older F Type Rs. The full video for the Jag you can check out by the way by clicking on the link appearing above here. We will continue now with the second most important aspect for the price of a car, and that is the mileage. And the depreciation per 1000 miles is displayed in the graph over here, where we have now miles on the horizontal axis and price still on the vertical axis. And you can see that the average depreciation per 1000 miles driven is $655. And this is actually quite a sensible number. And if we evaluate then the shape of the depreciation curve, then we can see that the depreciation curve is bottoming out quite nicely for the higher mileage cars. In fact, for the cars with a mileage above 30,000 miles, the curve is almost completely flat. Note however that the uncertainty in the depreciation curve is also the largest here, which is displayed by the large shaded area. If we look then to the beginning of the curve, then we can see that of course the largest drop is clearly visible for the new cars. Therefore, it also makes sense to have a look to this curve without the new cars in the picture. And that is exactly what is shown in the graph over here, where we have now in blue the new cars and in orange and green the curves for the used cars. And without the large effect of the new cars to the depreciation curve, we can see that the depreciation is further lowered to $492 per 1000 miles driven. So how do the two graphs which you just saw then compare to the ones of the F Type R? You guessed it, we are going to have a look to that. On the left hand side you can see now the depreciation for both the F Type and the GTS for the full market. At the right hand side you can see the same picture, but only for the used cars. Now for the full market, you can see that the depreciation per 1000 miles driven is significantly higher for the F Type than it is for the GTS. The F Type namely has an average depreciation per 1000 miles driven, which is €1,133. And you can see that this number is so high due to the high new price for an F Type. When this effect of the new cars is removed, you can see at the graph in the right that the depreciation rate for the AMG GTS and the F Type R are almost exactly the same. A used F Type R namely depreciates $484 per 1000 miles driven. So then, if you're still here after all of those statistics, That must mean that you really like the AMG GTS and you're either looking to purchase one or you probably own one. And then you definitely need to keep on watching, because we're going to have a look now to the fair purchasing prices for an AMG GTS. So let's talk business. And as you probably expected, I like to use a data-driven approach to find the fair purchasing price. I therefore inputted the price, the model year and the mileage to an algorithm which determines for us the extent to which a car has a fair purchasing price. And the result of that you can see in the 3D plot over here, where you can see that we've indeed now model year, price and the mileage. Furthermore, you can see that the cars are now colored, and the darker the color, the more likely it is that that specific car has a fair purchasing price. This does then also mean that the lighter the color of the bubble, the less likely it is that that car has a fair purchasing price. It is either priced over the market or under the market. Now, in case that the car is priced under the market value, this of course might represent a good buying opportunity. In general, however, the risk associated with such a purchase is a bit higher than it is with the cars which are priced fairly. In this video, we will therefore only focus on the latter category. So let's have a look then. We can see first of all that the cars which are labeled as having a fair purchasing price tend to fall in model years 2016 and 2017. Furthermore, if we rotate the graph then a little bit, we can see that they tend to be priced between $80,000 and $95,000. And if we rotate the graph again a little bit, then you can see that they should have a mileage of less than 20,000 miles. And as you probably guessed, these fair purchasing prices are significantly higher than the fair purchasing prices for the F Type R. These were namely between $50,000 and $75,000 for cars from model year 2015, 16 or 17, which have less than 30,000 miles. And with that point, it's time to wrap up this analysis and to conclude. In general, I think that the depreciation on an AMG GT S is quite in line with the expectations. The car is namely losing about 30% of its value in its first year, and after that the depreciation starts to decrease significantly. The strongest decrease is of course visible for the older model years, so the cars from model year 2017 and model year 2016. It is then also from those years onwards that the market starts to form a minor bottom. And this is of course then also reflected in the forecasted values, which show that of course you can still expect the GTS to drop slightly, but that this drop is relatively small compared to the price levels. Comparing this then to the F Type R, we saw that the absolute average depreciation per year is more or less the same for both cars, and the same goes for the forecasted values. In relative terms, however, these numbers are a lot higher for the F Type R, because the price points are simply lower for that car. An interesting development regarding that you can see, by the way, in model year 2016. Here you can see namely very clearly that the high mileage GTSs start to overlap with the low mileage F Type Rs. If you're therefore in the market for an F Type R and your budget is around that area, then I would definitely recommend to also check out an AMG GTS. Only looking to the depreciation, that might actually be the more sensible choice. Now personally, I'm a huge fan of the new Panamericana grille in the facelifted GT series. I would then most likely also still wait 1 or 2 years till those cars start to bottom out and then go for one of those. Now in any other case, we saw that the expected depreciation is by far the lowest for the cars from model year 2016. And therefore, purely from a depreciation perspective, a car from model year 2016, which falls within the fair purchasing price range, would be probably the smartest choice. And with that we arrive at the end of this video. Now if you enjoyed the analysis, please support the channel by smashing that like button. Also make sure then to browse through my channel, as you will find depreciation analysis for many other cars. As always, thank you for watching and I see you next week at a new video.